This is what we are. We are...
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thank you as well to Alberto, whose talk sort of perfectly set up my own, not just because he shouted out the app. I'll give you €20 for that plug, but also because Quartz has tried to be a news organization that's built to keep riding that wave. Whether we'll succeed at that, I don't know, but I want to talk today about how we've thought about what a new kind of news organization can be and how that's manifesting itself in some of our newer products that we've released. So about 4 years ago, we walked into this room in New York City, and I was struck then, and every time I look at this photo, continue to be struck by what it symbolized, which was that this whole thing was going to be built from scratch. And this is 2012, a time in media when it was already clear what was happening to our industry, and that felt like an amazing challenge to take on. Everything we would do would be built from scratch. That included the desks, and it included the name. So the other photo I often return to is this one, where we were trying to pick the name for this new business news organization that Atlantic Media was about to launch. And as you see, these were our finalists for the choices. And we landed on Quartz, obviously. The reason we did so, what I like to think about it as, was essentially a dare. To dare ourselves to not pick the other names are fine names, but somewhat traditional names for a news organization. We wanted to pick something that was unexpected, and that signaled, if nothing else, that we were not like what news organizations came before us. We also, just like the letters Q and Z, they're the rarest letters in the English language, and became our URL, qz.com. So this is what we call Quartz to the public. Quartz is a guide to the new global economy for business people who are excited by change. This is a little bit of a marketing speak, to be honest, but I like it for two reasons. One, it does not include the word news, and two, it doesn't include the word website. Now, to be honest, we are a news website. That is primarily what Quartz is. But I, as I'll go on to explain, like to describe ourselves in broader terms, because it's allowed us to think, I think, a little more creatively about what a news organization can be. QZ.com was our first product, the first manifestation of what this guide to the new global economy is, but it was not to be the last. And that's what I'll talk about in the rest of our talk. So this is the public-facing definition of Quartz. Internally, about a year ago, we started using a different definition internally to think about and make sense of all the various products we've released. And that is simply that Quartz is an API. I mean this both literally and figuratively. In the literal sense, before we built anything on the website, we built an API for our content, the website being the first consumer of that API, but it's also made it much easier for us to launch new products and more flexibly redesign the site, bring to bear prototypes faster than we would otherwise. So in a literal sense, most of Quartz's products are built on the Quartz API. But I also mean it figuratively. We've plugged into the web as our first iteration of Quartz, but as we've thought about other manifestations of what this guide to the new global economy could be, it's helped to think of ourselves as figuratively as an API, that what lies at the center of our organization is the brand Quartz, but it also has the ability to go out to a variety of platforms, just as Alberto was just speaking about. So again, at the center of it all is Quartz, and from there come our products. So the brand becomes the most important thing. Defining ourselves, a guide to the new global economy, becomes the most important element of our, if our readers don't see and feel that, then we've not succeeded. Out of the brand come our actual products. And the first two we launched with in September 2012 were QZ.com, the website, and the Quartz Daily Brief, a morning email that tries to give you an efficient news briefing. And of course, we grew from there. So after that, we launched a podcast, we launched a charting platform, we started doing live events. And even more recently, we've added video, and that's exploded. And beyond that, we've added a project called Jasper, which I'll explain more about in a few minutes. And this, over time, is how we've come to understand Quartz. I think the traditional way of viewing at least a news website is you have the website at the center, and from there may be external products, perhaps like areas to syndicate that content, or offshoots of the brand. We've decided to think about it a little differently, and though it may manifest itself in similar ways, it becomes kind of crucial for how we think about what each of these products can be. They don't all have to be the same. In fact, we insist on each of them sort of bringing a very different experience to our readers and designing each of them quite differently, which I'll explain a bit now. So we started with QZ.com. We are big believers in the open web, and so the fundamental principle of why we wanted to start with a website is that we thought that for a news organization starting in 2012, the best way to reach people and the quickest way to reach people was via the open web. About the same time we were launching, you might remember an experiment by News Corp, an iPad-only newspaper, so to speak, called The Daily. That had just shut down, and there were a number of experiments with native apps that had seemed promising at the time, but had proven not to be successful. That'll be an important point in just a second because we just launched a native app. But our conviction at the time and still today was that for a website and a news organization trying to grow from zero to a large audience, the open web was the way to do that, and the native apps for iOS and Android were sort of in direct opposition to that goal. So that was QZ.com. But we also launched an email. And the conviction there was that our website could do something different, each article standing alone, spreading on its own with our readers. And the email could serve a purpose that might be viewed as a little more traditional. While our website didn't attempt to be a comprehensive briefing on the news, our morning email does attempt to do that. And as a result, it has a smaller audience than the website, but a much more passionate one. Very often I have a chance to meet someone, and say I work for Quartz, and they say, "Oh, I love Quartz, what an amazing email." And I get to talking to them after a little bit more, and I start to realize that not only do they know the email, they actually are unaware that Quartz has a website, QZ.com. They've never been to it. And at first, this was a little disturbing, but I've grown to really love that. And it's because we want, each experience. It doesn't have to serve every reader. For about 200,000 people, this is the way they wake up every morning and the way they experience Quartz. And for 17 million other people, QZ.com is the way that they experience Quartz. And from that observation has sort of inspired the products that we've launched more recently. The first of which is Atlas. Atlas is a destination and home for all of the charts that Quartz produces. And it came out of a conviction that while we love being a publisher, platforms have some crucial advantages over publishers, and why should we have to choose? So right now, Atlas is a home for all of the charts that Quartz creates, but very soon it will also be a home for anyone to make a chart using the same tools that our journalists use that we've built in-house to distribute on their own wherever and embed wherever they want, with the hope that we can straddle the line between being a publisher and a platform. And the most recent product we've launched is what we've codenamed internally Jasper, because it's a form of Quartz. All of these really are forms of Quartz. And this project began out of this conviction, because when we launched in 2012, we put quite a focus on readers making the shift to mobile. We made sure that the website worked best on people's phones. But at this point, 4 years on, responsive design is almost a cliche. And while we feel like we've done a good job with making sure the website works, we also feel like there's a decent likelihood that the shift to mobile, dramatic as it's been thus far, is actually about to get even more dramatic. And that as a news organization that relies on people, the majority of our readers getting us on their phones, about 60% right now, it might behoove us to start thinking a little differently about the proposition of mobile. That is, just as newspapers made the mistake at first of taking their print editions and just putting them online and calling that a website, we don't want to be, we could discard that. We didn't have that risk, right? We were never in print. But we also don't want to make the same mistake with taking our website and just shrinking it down to a mobile phone. It might be true that a truly good mobile experience of journalism should be different. And so the first project out of Jasper is an iPhone app simply called Quartz, because again, this is the version of Quartz in the form of a native app for iPhone. And all of you Android users, I apologize, we're working on it, which we launched just about 2 months ago. And when we set out about a year ago to start thinking about what we could do with a native app, we still held firm to that conviction I was talking about earlier, where the open web was our best friend, where we wanted to be. And so we knew at first a little more about what we didn't want to do with a native app than what we did want to do. What we didn't want to do was a copy of our website. You can go to our website, qz.com, and scan headlines there. We didn't really know what we wanted to do. I'll talk through some of the thinking in a second, but that turned out to be a somewhat liberating concept, that we didn't have to take and essentially make a facsimile of the website became a real charge. We didn't have to release anything at all. We should only do an iPhone app if we have an experience for it that we liked. So this is what we did. Quartz for iPhone it uses a very simple conversational interface to bring you the news as though you are having a conversation with Quartz. We just put it out there. We didn't even brace readers for what they might expect. Most people, of course, downloading a news app would expect to scan through a list of headlines. They certainly wouldn't expect that the app would start talking to you. And what we found thus far is hundreds of thousands of people have downloaded it. Tons of people say they love it. Some people hate it too, and I'll talk about that. But we were very happy with this first version of an iPhone app that was at its core an attempt to answer the question, what would Quartz be? What would a news organization be if it were a native app? This, though, is the evolution of how we got there. So about a year ago, we started with just one idea, which was, hey, this notifications thing seems like an interesting opportunity. People have sort of, have migrated from thinking of notifications as just annoying to maybe actually using their lock screens as their new inbox. What could we do around notifications that might provide a good experience? So we very quickly built an app that sent notifications. That wasn't very hard. The bigger question was, what the hell would go inside the app itself? And we tried a variety of answers to that question. I won't show you all of them, but here are two. One was just, maybe we'll make it a list of the notifications. Another was, of course, a card-based approach. All of them fine, but none that really spoke to us as a good answer to this question of what Quartz could be if it were an iPhone app. Eventually, we settled on a notion of a conversational interface. What we liked about it was, we started with this idea of notifications being messages. Why not just extend that into the app itself? It's all just messages. Some of them come to you on your lock screen. The majority of them come to you if you go into the app itself. How might that work? And so we built this prototype to try that out. It sounded to us like maybe a crazy, but perhaps just crazy enough kind of idea. And as we tested it, we thought, hey, this actually is decently compelling and worth exploring further. We also knew that this was really ugly and we would need to work on the design a bit further. So we started prototyping some options for the interface. Here are just 3 of them. Again, all of these were fine and obviously a lot better in terms of the visual aesthetic than that original prototype. But as we used this more and more, it became very clear to us that the one thing that was missing was any sense of life. At this point, we were using content that we were producing for our homepage and just pulling it in programmatically. Again, right? Quartz is an API, and in order to test the idea. There was no dedicated editorial team writing for this app, and the more we used it, the more that became really, really clear. The interface was fine, but the experience was totally lifeless. So this was actually a relief because the predictions of the past that all of us in the content business would eventually be put out of work by robots, that may come to pass, but our finding thus far is it hasn't come to pass. In fact, while our app emulates artificial intelligence or an automated assistant like Siri, it's almost entirely written by hand. The elements of it that are automated are sort of in between to intelligently know what you've seen before, what time of day it is, that sort of thing. But almost all of it is scripted on several times a day by a team of editors around the world, and they don't look like this. So in order to explore this idea of actually creating content for the app with actual humans, we needed to start prototyping that experience as well. As we thought about it, we realized what we'd built was essentially a choose-your-own-adventure game. Instead of interactive fiction, this was interactive nonfiction. And if any of you are familiar with that genre, you know there are a variety of editors for interactive fiction widely available and open sourced. So we started using those to try crafting these scripts, as we called them, for users. This was one of the first ones, and the very clear finding was that while this was a very interesting way to get through the news, it was far, far too complex for any human to write and rewrite multiple times a day, and so this was not going to work for us. So we tried simplifying it. We narrowed down the architecture of the app to just a few branches. And even this, while easier to write, also started to seem overbearing for the user. That every time you went through the app, each thing we said to you prompted a variety of choices which you had to choose from. And while a lot of users profess to like choice, when we tested it with our users, they found it both confusing and burdensome to pick from a variety of choices each time they went through the flow. And so the conversation got much more linear. This, to be honest, also was useful for our writers because to craft an experience for people, again, multiple times a day, is a difficult proposition, and to try to simplify what it is you're writing becomes important. Nevertheless, it's an all-new form of writing. Again, it draws a bit from choose-your-own-adventure games, but for journalists, at least, it's not something we have any experience with. And so we needed a tool to do that form of writing, and when we looked around, it didn't exist. So we built our own CMS for the app in order to power this. So it divides each item of the app into what we call frames, and each frame into a conversation. And it's WYSIWYG because the only way you could possibly write effectively for this app is to put yourself in the chair in the thumbs, I guess, of the user and experience it the way the reader is going to experience it. And thus, this is what we ended up creating, and trying to think about what would Quartz's kind of journalism, which again is global business news, be if it took the form of a conversation with readers, and what were the advantages of a conversational interface. You could actually have the reader in essence, interact with the news. Or you could inject a ton of GIFs into it. GIFs and emoji are a huge part of the experience of the iPhone app. I love that you're all doing emoji reactions. We call the emoji that we use for user actions emoji reactions internally, and so this is like awesome for me to see a physical manifestation of an emoji reaction. We had to face hard questions about, could you actually do serious news in the form of this conversational interface? Where would it meet its limits? I mean, we're still figuring that out, to be honest, but you sort of just embrace the idea that this is all there is. Like, there's no second, well, there is a setting screen, but there's no other interface here, right? This is the experience, which challenges the writer to fit that into any sort of news, whether it's protests in Brazil, an explosion somewhere in the world, or just a fun news item. And it allows us to do things like this, a Donald Trump filter. So if you just want to skip anything that he said, you can tap on the button on the right and move on to more important news. We also wanted to hold true to the original idea, which was, what could we do with this whole notifications thing? At the time, a lot of news organizations, and many still do this, were sending out notifications that were, mounted simply to saying, hey, we just published this article, you might want to read it, which I don't know about you, but I find incredibly annoying. Others were more like breaking news alerts, but written in an incredibly cryptic way, as though you only had 50 characters with which to write on the lock screen. In the years since, a lot of news organizations have gotten better at that, and we wanted to be part of that trend and provide an experience on your lock screen that you could enjoy without even opening the app. Obviously, these notifications also serve as a push to go into the app, where we have a lot more information for you. But you can read this notification and get the top line news and even a little context, all without leaving your lock screen. We also send people poetry. So every day at the close of the U.S. markets, we send out a wrap-up of how the stock market did in the form of a haiku. And one day, I got this on my phone, which is our version of how the stock market had performed, right next to the Wall Street Journal's version. And I don't even mean to suggest that one is better than the other. Obviously, the Journal's is way more informative about what had happened on the stock market. Ours tries to do something a little different, which is to say, whether the markets were up or down today is not so important. If you are a Quartz reader, you probably care to a certain extent, but mostly we want to entertain you. And I think it's a missed point in our industry. We tend to focus on the utility of news, and my opinion is that we're actually in the entertainment industry, and the kinds of people we entertain are people who think it's really entertaining to read the news. And when you start thinking about it that way, you end up with experiences like this, which we weren't sure how people would react to haikus summarizing the markets, but which our readers have said they really like. They don't mind it on their lock screen because they don't even see it as a disturbance. They just see it as like just a little bright spot of poetry at the end of the day. And we tried to focus on the touches. So if any of you are users, you may not even have discovered this slight touch of the app, but iOS has interactive notifications, so you can just swipe to the left on any notification to get a variety of options. And so for every notification we send out, we also include a little Easter egg, which is to pick what we think is the one emoji that perfectly summarizes the news item that we've just sent you. And so picking that one emoji, in this case evoking an offshore account, has become like you would be stunned the amount of attention and time that is consumed in our newsroom we got to send this out, it's breaking news, we can't wait, but we have to figure out what the right emoji is. Speaking of emoji, our complication for the Apple Watch is, again, a markets-focused complication. It's down there on the bottom right, telling you how the U.S. stock markets are doing at any moment in the form of an emoji. We don't provide a key to the emoji anywhere, though I hope it's obvious that this was a particularly bad day for the stock market. And again, we're not, if you are someone who truly needs to know whether the S&P 500 is up or down, you are undoubtedly glued to your terminal getting that information. So we don't presume to put that an actual number on your watch because that's not a real life use case. Instead, we want to provide a sense of what's going on in the markets because again, that's what our readers want, but in a way that fits into your life and just allows you to do a passing, and the markets appear to be up right now, glance at what's both going on in the news and a touch of personality, which, as I hope you can see, is sort of what infuses this entire experience, as well as advertising. So we, of course, had to think about what we would do to make any money from this app, and what we settled on were two components. So there's a display ad component, which you experience every time, at least once a day coming into the app, but we also integrated a native ad, so to speak. We only do this once per ad because we didn't want to be annoying about it, plus if you kept repeating the same message, it would be a terrible experience for user and advertiser alike. But we were, delighted to see that the sponsor message that users encounter when they get to the end of so-called script was not annoying to most readers. They even found it a bit of a delightful, Easter egg at the end of the experience. And this is how people reacted. So this is a great site, not just because they praised our app, called User Onboard, that sort of deconstructs how apps do their onboarding experience. Our onboarding experience, I was praised, but I kind of think it's the most obvious onboarding experience in the world, which is just, of course, to jump right into the chat and have the chat explain to you how the app works. And these are the kinds of messages that we're getting from readers. People noticing the small details, talking about the personality. And I don't put up all these tweets just to toot our own horn. I put them up because of the language people are using. Words like fun and love are just not words people use to describe news or news products or news organizations. It's not words we're particularly used to as journalists. We're used to a lot of hate instead of love. Maybe the hate will come someday. I'm sure it will. But to have that kind of relationship with readers is exactly what we were going for. To delight every reader in a way that inspires loyalty is the internal mission statement of the app, which we stole from a local burrito chain. But of course, not everyone loves it, and I really like these kinds of tweets too, because it goes to a core part of the product strategy for the app, which was to be intentionally polarizing. Our feeling was that if we made an app that would be good enough for everyone, it would probably be just another native app in news that no one particularly wanted to keep returning to or fall in love with. And so a product strategy that's intentionally polarizing is risky, of course. It does lead to some people who just hate it. Fully cognizant that not everyone wants to go through the button tap experience of the news and just give me the damn headlines, right? But allows us to have a deeper relationship with the people on the other side. I met someone just a moment ago at the last break who had heard of the app and professed. He was either being nice or he actually did love it, and said he really liked it. And just like in that Daily Brief example, was not aware that Quartz was a website or an email or even existed prior to the launch of this app. And I love that. That's the whole point. That this is an opportunity to reach new readers, think about products in a new way. So this is what we are now. I have no idea what the new products from there will become, but the idea is, again, how can Quartz spread this idea of what a news organization can be in a variety of formats, with all of it coming back to the core, which is the brand Quartz. Thanks very much.